Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. This is Joy Scott, and I want to welcome you to our conversations with Peter Woodbury on the fascinating topic of soul contact, how to awaken to your inner wisdom. So a little bit of information about who our sponsor is today, Edgar Cayce's Association for Research and Enlightenment. We are the Southern California chapter for the Edgar Cayce A.R.E. organization. We are involved in learning and studying from the Cayce readings. And if you'd like to know more about the A.R.E. and its incredibly wonderful programs, you can visit www.edgarcayce.org, and also finding out information about study groups using the Edgar Cayce material to find our way on a spiritual path. I'm the host. I recently wrote a book called Magenta Nation about using these concepts to bring together America. Peter, we thank you so much for your coaching and advice on that. Really appreciated it. I'm the Los Angeles area coordinator for the A.R.E. and again, very pleased to welcome you to our community here. We also have a Facebook page and a meetup page if you would like to sign up to find out more about information and events. So today we have, I think it's our 6th session, Conversations with, a series of dialogues with noted leaders on spirit and science about healing ourselves and our world. Peter is an incredible presenter. I have heard many of his programs. You may have as well. He is the A.R.E.'s instructor for past life regression hypnosis certificate training, which is a mouthful, and professional life certificate training, so that if you would like to develop these skills yourself, he is the instructor offering these classes through the A.R.E. He's done more than an average of one a day of regressions over the last few years. I've been privileged to have a regression with Peter, and I know he's doing these remotely now, so anyone can avail themselves of this insight and this experience. He calls his past life regression approach soul contact, and that's what he'll be talking about today. He's a student of the Cayce material. We also through the A.R.E. do travel tours. I'm looking forward to going with Peter to Peru next year. And again, it's a delight to have him as a presenter. So we will be taking questions. You can use the chat feature on your screen if you have a question that you'd like to ask. We will be doing that after Peter's presentation and our discussion, so you can get your individual questions answered too. And with that, I want to introduce Peter to share your screen with us. And there he is coming in. There you are.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, Peter. Thanks for being with us today. And you're in Virginia Beach, right?
Yes.
Are you on the East Coast? Yes. So thanks for staying up past your bedtime, I'm sure, to talk to us tonight.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I love talking about regression and hypnosis and soul contact. You know, when you're a regressionist, you're working alone with folks, and so it's wonderful to get chances to share the work.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are really happy and excited to hear what you have to say tonight. And of course, we can never get too much knowledge for our own spiritual development, you know, whether it's within ourselves, within through our higher self, through study, through prayer, meditation. We're seekers. So this is an avenue that is very prolific with insights and understanding and healing. So we are so happy to be getting those insights from you tonight.
Great. So should I go ahead and share my screen now?
Yes. Why don't you go ahead and share your screen?
Okay. There we go. Can you see that? Does that look?
Yes.
clear?
Yes, that looks good.
Okay, good. And so what I thought I'd do is just use this PowerPoint really just as a springboard so we can have a conversation and if there's questions from the audience, maybe we do that at the end, but please interrupt me as I'm just going through these slides. So I started off doing past life regression like most regressionists do. And then I began to have experiences with clients that they went into other experiences besides just past lives. So folks started going into the future sometimes, or they started contacting deceased loved ones, or they started going into spaces of healing and energy, sometimes into almost like outer space kind of galactic experiences. And then, of course, what's become kind of my specialty has been working with guides, helping people access the guide level of experience. And so I call it also regression hypnosis for healing, because that's really the focus of what I do, how I see that this is beneficial. You know, we just taught a life coaching class this past week, and we were trying to think what exactly is the Edgar Cayce model of healing, of spirituality. And it's really, I think that through his work we're coming into an understanding of ourselves as connected to our souls and connected to God. And so we do that oftentimes through looking at our dreams, or we do it through meditation. And I find that regressions are also a way that people can move out of their ego centered consciousness. It's a little bit like when I say, I am Peter. Do I put my center of identity in Peter, or do I see myself as the I am? It's kind of like if you believe in reincarnation and the eternal nature of the soul, Peter's like a leaf on the tree. And once the leaf falls, the tree continues, and there's been other leaves, and there'll be future leaves. And so we're moving into this identity of the eternal. So that's how I see this work, is that we're moving Peter, your experience, just from your little finite experience into the, whatever you want to call it, the Akashic records, or just the history of the soul, which goes in all kinds of directions. And so I also sometimes I joke around that what you experience in a near-death experience is very similar to what can happen in a regression. But I don't recommend near-death experiences, obviously. Sometimes you might get a little too near. So this is that, quintessential Edgar Cayce: spirit is the life, mind is the builder, and the physical is the result. And so I think that we're in a physical world, and for some of us, some people we know, some people we love, it's kind of, they're stuck on the physical dimension, which would be the five senses, or what science calls the materialistic view. But I think with Edgar Cayce, we've been introduced to the concept that mind is the builder, that there's something that creates, that we have access to, and then that beyond that is spirit, which is the core. It's kind of the cause. And how we use spirit is, if we have access to spirit, then we have much more health than if we're cut off from spirit. And then in the work I've done, I found that the psyche, which Cayce means the soul naturally wants to heal itself, meaning that if you cut your hand, your body has natural processes that heal the wound. And I think that we all have in our lives, we generate wounds. And in this process of regression, that a person goes to places that are of healing. And what I've learned to do is really just get out of the way and let these healing processes occur. For example, I had a gentleman come to me. This was a long time ago when I was first starting, and he had a chronic laryngitis condition just like Edgar Cayce did. And so that's how he was curious, because he said, oh, well, Edgar Cayce cured it with hypnosis. Maybe I should try that. So he was able to go into pretty good deep trance. And at that time, I was using 3 doors. And so he approached the first door and he opened the door. And behind that door was a man with a spear. And he was, my sense was, oh no, this isn't what people are paying for. This is, people want Egypt or rainbows. So I said, why don't we go to the next door? And behind the next door was the same man with the spear. And I didn't get the message yet. So we went to the third door, where the third time there was the guy with the spear. So I was a little bit thrown off because it just seemed like wherever I took this guy, there was something to do with this man with the spear. And I knew that my bias was that this wasn't good, that he should have something healing and not something with somebody looking scary. So I said, thinking on my feet, I said, well, why don't you just imagine there's a seat there and just have a seat and contemplate what's going on. And he did. And he said, oh, I get it. He was quiet for a little while. And he says, I get it. He says, they're showing me the whole chain of events, that this man that I'm seeing, he killed me in a past life. He speared me in the throat. And I died with such anger and fear and resentment that it's locked in. I'm still carrying around this energetic imprint from how I reacted to this death. But he said, they're showing me that there was purpose, that there was somehow karma that I had to deal with in this death. But then it resolved, that things went fine after that. I learned my lesson. And so he said, my guides are telling me that I need to re-experience this death, not with anger and fear, but with peace and understanding. And so he went ahead and re-experienced the death, and once it was over, he knew right away. He said, it's over, it's done. I realize now this is what I was holding on to. And he's been in touch with me over the years, and he's never had a recurrence of this chronic laryngitis. So that's the example I use most often about how there was a natural process that wanted to happen. When he went into the trance state, when he went into closer levels to spirit, to the soul, it wanted him to awaken to this experience with the death with the man and the spear. But I was trying to get in the way. I was trying to block a healing process. So that experience and many others have taught me, I go with what's behind the door. We pray before sessions. They tell me what they're hoping to achieve, and I say behind that door is whatever's going to be most helpful to you. And so oftentimes people go through very intense experiences. Sometimes they're quite it's not just a man with a spear. Sometimes it's the death by the spear, or these sorts of things. But I tell my students, I've never told anybody that behind this door is the worst experience you can ever remember. If I gave that hypnosis, if I gave that suggestion, that wouldn't be so good. But I just say behind this door is something that's going to be very helpful for you. And if they experience something that's very traumatic or tragic, what I've learned is that there's something, it's almost like a cyst. There's something that has to be released from that experience, something that's been held on to. And it's a subconscious cause of an issue in this life that they have to deal with from a past life.
Peter, you had
Yeah.
mentioned that this gentleman had this recurring problem.
Yes.
And so a lot of us seem to experience patterns of repeating same types of experiences,
Mm-hmm.
like being in a relationship with someone who's abusive and then getting into another one. Maybe it's a
Yeah.
different kind, or um, can you talk about your experience with working with people on these types of patterns and what you might find might
Sure.
be behind them? Sometimes it feels like, I I was this in a past life and I'm still having this problem. Why is this chain keep going on?
Oh yeah. That's one of the main reasons people come for a session is a stubborn pattern that's playing out in relationships, and they can see it all the way back to the childhood. And that there's a platitude that says, we marry our mothers and marry our fathers. And there's some truth to that sometimes the unresolved issues with the mother and father repeat in the partners that we have. Now, I had a background as a psychologist or as a psychotherapist, and they call that a repetition compulsion, that somehow you just keep repeating the same problem, and there was like something pathological or broken about you. But in my understanding of the Cayce work and looking at regressions, it's not so much that this is a repetition compulsion that it makes no sense or that there's something wrong with you. These patterns that we repeat, we choose them, we seed them. So if you marry your father, you marry your mother, you pick that situation in your childhood to experience and to learn from it. And the way that you resolve these patterns is it has much less to do necessarily with the other person. As Cayce said, most karma is with self. And so, if your dad was abusive or a narcissist, and then you marry somebody, he's abusive and he's a narcissist, and you break up with him and you marry the next one, they also repeat that pattern. See, the problem isn't the external people. The issue that has to be resolved is within self. And it's oftentimes a self-esteem pattern or self-worth pattern that has to be addressed and to be healed. So we can't solve those problems outside of yourself. I think that's why going inside and understanding those patterns, you see, it's one of the things I remember from psychotherapy is that I could tell my patient or my client certain things and they wouldn't necessarily hear it. But if they heard it in a group, like a group therapy, they heard it very differently. And so sometimes, I kind of know or get a sense of what's going on. But when people hear this kind of feedback from their guides, it has such a deep and profound effect on them. It's like it's coming from within them instead of outside of them. I think we screen out, the kindly advice of others. But oftentimes the guides will tell you, they'll say, you're much more worthy. You've learned so much. You've been going through these patterns, and you can release it if you want. You've done the work to let that issue go. But I think what people don't realize is that also, these challenges and these obstacles that we work through, they make us stronger. So it's almost like I tried to, I spent a year studying suffering. I know it's an odd subject, but I wanted to, because I didn't think the New Age made a very good job of trying to explain suffering, why good people suffer, why bad people suffer, why anybody suffers. And I couldn't really make it simple. I got to a deeper understanding of it. But the best idea I could think of is that if you have a life you're fed bonbons all the time, and it's so leisurely, and you're just never work a day in your life, everything's provided for you. You have that life, and then you have a life where there's tremendous obstacles and abuse and suffering and pain, that if you look on the soul level, the soul is saying that's a much more, the suffering life is much more valuable than the one where there was really no effort. And so it may seem strange, but it's the soul comes here to work. And the ego, I always say, wants a pina colada in Barbados. And so we don't really, the ego and soul, it takes a while for them to reconcile with each other. But just back to your question, why do we repeat these patterns? Pema Chodron says, a pattern doesn't go away until we learn the lesson that it's trying to teach us. And I think that a lot of times the lesson is from the subconscious, and the lesson has to do with past lives. And the lesson also has to do with our pre-life planning. The soul plans the life, and then the ego wakes up and goes, what the heck is this about? Like imagine, some of us want to do a really hard study program. So let's say you really want to study astrophysics. And so you decide you're going to take this course in astrophysics, and it's going to be hard, it's going to be a lot of work, but ultimately it'll be a great accomplishment, and it's really in line with what you want to do to help the world and that sort of thing. But imagine that you planned going to a graduate school of astrophysics on the soul level, and then the ego wakes up and it's in the classroom, and it's like, oh my God, this is really hard. What, nobody else is struggling like me. I want to get out of here. So that's the poor ego wasn't part of the planning to go into this field. And I think that's oftentimes why in childhood we don't have much free will. Like, we're kind of trapped. So that's like the ego is trapped in the school program that the soul picked for it. Usually those first 16, 18 years, we are pretty much trapped with the patterns that we're having to work on with our parents. And so that's why so much of of our karma is seated in that experience. There's no running from it. And then when you get 16 or 18, then you have more of your ego-centered free will, and you can start making choices about how you want to handle some of these issues. But I think that if somebody goes to therapy, it helps them get an insight about what's going on from their lives. But I think if they do like they get deeper in touch with their soul, they start to see, I believe that everything that's happening in our life is either karmic, meaning we're meeting an effect of our cause, or it's soul choice. We sometimes pick the graduate school. We want to go into these difficult families and experience these really, really complicated experiences, not because we like to suffer, but because we learn. It's everybody wants to be mature, but nobody wants to face obstacles. And that's how you mature, overcoming obstacles. I could give you some more examples, but I want to hear your thoughts.
That's really enlightening in terms of there have been a lot of work done on what souls do choose and why they choose it. And it's
Mm-hmm.
a sign of maturity, I believe, to be able to look at an obstacle or a situation in which you've been really treated badly or had a
Mm-hmm.
tragedy as not punishment, but why did I come into this world knowing I was going to have this experience?
Yeah.
Once you get through the emotion of it, what is there for me to learn? For example, when people often they lose someone they love who passes away, they can be inspired to really live their life more
Mm-hmm.
fully and in
Mm-hmm.
honor of that person. And that doesn't make the grief go away. That's still a huge burden and pain, but it also makes us more compassionate, that we can understand pain in others. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not that everything has a silver lining so much, is that it's, as you were talking about, we chose this learning as we have come into this life. And it's not always fun. Most of the time, it isn't the best fun, the
Mm-hmm.
most fun you've ever had when this happens, but it is good for our soul. That's why we come into the earth plane or earth school in the first place.
Yeah, it's a little bit like as you're talking, I like to think in analogies. It's a little bit like the child is the ego, and the parent is kind of the soul. And it's a little
Mm.
bit like, I can't remember any kid that wants to go get their shots. you know I hated shots, but my parents, they knew that I needed them. And so it's a little bit like the ego doesn't want to have anything to do with these shots, but the soul part is saying you need this is it's gonna hurt and that sort of thing, but it's gonna be good for you in the long run. I think that's kind of the way that soul and ego interact.
That's I agree with you. And I just had these images of me getting shots and trying to hide under the doctor's table, and they had to pull me out.
Oh
We
gosh, I
some
used
of
to
us are more
scream.
resistant to our
Oh,
lessons than
I
others.
was the I was the youngest, and I don't know why my parents would send me in first, because I would just scream. I must have terrified my brothers and sisters. They just hear me like as if I was getting mauled by a tiger or something.
Yeah, yeah. Some of us are more resistant than others, I think.
Well, now I have to get shots. I have a thyroid condition, so every 6 months I get a shot. You get used to it. It's like when you're a kid, it's just like you think it. I mean, maybe the needles were bigger back then. I don't know. I still don't look at the needle. I'm not fond of seeing that going in.
Yeah,
But
I really think it hurts worse when you're little for some
yeah.
reason. Yeah.
Well, let me tell you a couple stories that I found really interesting, just about trying to understand like the role of suffering and struggle and patterns in life. Because it's such a key point. Some people give up a belief in God because they say, how can there be suffering and there be a God? Like, how could things happen to children the way they do? How could a loving God allow such a thing? And so those were the things I was trying to answer. And it's like there's this, when you're doing soul work, or any kind of, almost, I guess, any work, there's so much synchronicity. Like you get the answers coming to you. And so I had two clients come that they didn't know I was doing this research piece, but they wanted to know, I talk oftentimes about how we pick our parents. And I always kind of joke around because, some folks have had really difficult experiences with their parents. So I'll say, does anybody want to leave? It's such a crazy idea that you would have picked your parents. And so this one woman came and she said, well, Peter, you say that, and I want to believe that. And I know that Edgar Cayce say that, but let me tell you about my parents. She said, both of my parents were addicts, and I was born to, there was substances in my system as a child. I had to stay in the hospital for a while. It's like nowadays I would have never been given to my parents. And then my dad had died of an overdose when I was about 4, and that pushed my mother even further. And so I was in and out of different foster homes and back with my mother as she would go into anyway, she told this long story of, just and her brothers, or at least one of them took his life. And she said, my life has been crazy hard. Why would I have picked that? She said, yeah, I've had almost every kind of addiction, suicide attempt. It's a miracle I'm here. And so she was probably about 70 when she was coming in. And so I was curious too. I was wondering what we're going to find out. And so she got into a pretty decent level, deep trance, and she was able to reach her guides. And so she asked that question. She said, why did I pick my parents? And the response she got, she was repeating it aloud. She said, they're saying that I picked my dad because he was good looking and my mom because he was intelligent. And I'm thinking, what? And then she asked them, she said, are you joking? And then she said, oh, the guides say, yes, they're joking. And, I remember I was thinking, like, I like to joke around, but I was thinking, oh my gosh, a time and place to joke around. But I've learned with the guides, that level of consciousness is pure humor, it's pure joy. They just think we take stuff so much more seriously than we need to. So they said, yeah, you picked it. But then they said, yeah, we're joking. You picked your parents because you really wanted to learn. You really wanted to experience all these things. And look at you. Look at all that you've done. Your life is a tremendous success. We're all so proud of you. This is really something to celebrate. I'm paraphrasing, but that was the feeling that her feeling that this was a life of just horrible uh, experiences that were struggles. They were seeing it as like, you got a PhD in astrophysics, you got a PhD, and they said that's what you wanted to do. Nobody forced you to pick your parents. That was your own soul level choice that your ego, had to be dragged around through. That's why I think that the more you can awaken your ego to your soul, the more that there's going to be a harmony. Otherwise, you just feel like life has no purpose and meaning. But there is ways to tap into to that. So she was very, I could see the look on her face because it's just a different way of looking at it. Because she said, "I guess you can look at my life that I have overcome almost every addiction that there is. I'm not still an addict, but I've gotten through that. I'm not suicidal anymore. It's like when I saw her, I said, you could be the best life coach in the world because you would have so much empathy and compassion for everybody, people that go through these kind of experiences."
That's a brilliant example of how even the tragedies of life prepare us to be
Yeah.
the best people we can possibly be and really
Hmm.
fulfilling our life purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll tell you one more, and then we'll see where we go. Then there was another woman. It was at the same conference that she came for a session, and she said, I want to figure out what's going on in my life. She said, um, I was born to a single mother, and after a while, I realized that my mother was just incapable of love. Like she just wasn't. She had so many of her own traumas, her own stuff that she was just very, very self-centered. And so I kind of had to raise myself. And in a lot of ways, I raised my mother. And then she said, I was longing for love, and I eventually got married and was really looking forward to having a family and having a daughter or having a child. And she said, and I wasn't able to bear a child, so we adopted a child. And then we started to realize that our child had pretty serious attachment issues. And so my daughter has never really been able to express love or feel love. And she says, I'm in this loveless sandwich. She said, my mother doesn't couldn't care less about me. You know, my mother wouldn't reach out. I have to call my mother to hang out with her or visit her. And the same with my daughter. Why on earth would I pick this, like she called it, a loveless sandwich? She said, I'm the meat in between these two stale, stiff pieces of bread. And so again, she was able to achieve the trance level. And what she got was that her sole choice before this life was to learn how to love unconditionally. And she started crying when she heard that. It was so moving to realize, like, oh, since it was from her own self, it flooded her. I chose on purpose a mother who I would love, who wouldn't love me back. And then I chose a daughter who would need my love but wouldn't be able to love back. And so it was a very, very high choice that she had made in her soul development to experience and give unconditional love in a place where she wasn't receiving it back.
You know, that is also so profound. So,
Yes, I think so too. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
oh no, I was just going to ask. So in that regression, it was her guides who were speaking to her.
Yes.
So is that typical versus of the regressions that you're doing versus say
Mine, yes.
having memories of other lives? Could you
Well, what's
talk
happened is
about
like,
that?
my parents and my parents were psychiatrists, and then my two sisters and my brother are all psychiatrists. So I'm the youngest. I'm the only one who didn't go to medical school. But I always had I knew what being around doctors was like, and I know that you kind of do a general, you're in medical school, you're trying to figure out, so you do these rotations, and so you go into different, maybe you do a rotation in oncology and then a rotation in psychiatry, and it helps you decide what you want to do after you graduate, like what you're going to specialize in. And so I feel that it's a little bit similar, the model with, I think that when you first start, you learn how to do regression. It's almost like the basic level is past life regression, and then after that, you sort of start to specialize. Like, I know people that specialize in spirit releasement, or people that seem to take people a lot into the future. And my specialty is pretty consistently people can reach the guide level of consciousness. And I like the guide level because, sometimes when a person's remembering past lives, it's a little bit like interpreting a dream to figure out how it's related to their current life. It's very valuable, but there's an interpretation level. But if you can even go from a past life right to the guides, they explain it. It's almost like if you had a dream, but you could go to a place where your guide would tell you what the dream means, how it applies to your life. So that's why I like going to the guides. They're very direct. They're pretty direct. It's done telepathically. Sometimes it's symbolic too, but it's of all the soul contact dimensions, I think it's the most direct communication.
Okay. Peter, we started talking and I didn't want to take you away from the slides. Did you have others that you wanted to share?
Oh, it's like the slides have just been a springboard. It's like all of these issues are in there. So it's like let me see what's on this slide. And yeah, some of these are about just kind of the premises, um, how we come into this world and we have a kind of amnesia, soul amnesia, and people wonder why that is. Sometimes it's for a fresh start, but also it's because we're in three-dimensional minds, and it's hard to fit in the soul mind, which is infinite dimensions, and so it's gone into storage, which is what we call the subconscious. So if we want to get in touch with soul, we have to do some work. And I think the most common and practical work is through meditation. I think regression is a creative use of meditative states. So a meditative state, a regressionist or a hypnotist would call a trance state. But in meditation, you're kind of maybe doing some self-hypnosis if you're repeating a Cayce affirmation or something like that. But then in a regression, the regressionist starts to guide it, starts to use the suggestibility of the mind. So It's a similar state of consciousness. It's just used a bit differently. Yeah, so this is just about how I came to call it soul contact. That it's much broader than um, than just past life regressions. And so this is how I see it. You know, it's like the ego part's just the tip of the iceberg, and then when you reach behind the veil, you can reach the whole depths. And as Cayce said, that our own personal soul reaches all the way to the source, to God. So ultimately, it's like the tip of the finger is in manifestation, but if you keep going up the hand, that's made more of the personal soul. But by the time you're at the arms and the heart, you're into the unity, the oneness. Yes, this is the experience I told about. That the Akashic records are not even fixed. You know, that guy went back and altered an experience that was from the past. And I think that this theme here is one I talk about a lot. That I think in the previous age, you know, if there's a new age, sometimes there has to be an old age, or the age of Pisces. I think we were deeper in the we were thicker into physicality. And so the teachers were outside of ourselves. You know, Buddha kind of initiated the Piscean age, and then it goes through to Jesus, and Edgar Cayce's at the tail end, or actually the head end of the second fish of Pisces. But it was still outside of you. You know, with Jesus, you know, you just showed up. You know, you could be dead, or you could, you know, whatever. He did the heavy lifting for you. And then for Cayce, you would get a reading. He would tell you what to do. But I think in the new age is that we can now do this where the veil is thinner with the spiritual levels of consciousness and the soul. And so that's what I think, that with the regression, you're able to kind of wake up the inner Jesus or the inner Edgar Cayce, and they can access their own Akashic records. And through their guides, they can access a level of healing that's also possible. Oh, this is quite an in-depth section. This is about the Book of Revelation. And Cayce said that the two witnesses in Revelation are the two before we're, you know, every seeker who's awakening has to start to realize what is, you know, what more is to them than just a physical self. This life is, there's more to it, and start to recognize that you have a soul, an eternal part. And he says the two witnesses are the two aspects of yourself from before this incarnation that have witnessed your life. And he says those two witnesses are astrology and past lives. And so I just have all the quotes that Cayce talks about, how when he identifies that past lives are remembered emotionally and astrology is recorded mentally. And he says both of them are witnesses. So I, you know, at the time that I read the Book of Revelation, I was thinking that, you know, it's how much, doing regression, doing my life energy into it. And I was thinking, what's the value? But when I read Revelation, and Cayce said, you know, right alongside astrology, it's very, very important to awaken seekers to those influences. And then, you know, it's a little bit like seeing the previous scenes of the movie. We've all kind of woken up in the middle of a movie, and through a regression, you can see the scenes that came forward, and then your life starts to make a lot more sense. And for example, I have a sister that I never really trusted. And there was no reason for me not to trust her. And I never even thought it was a problem. I just seemed like, I don't know why anybody would trust her. But, you know, it never crossed my mind that that was an odd way of thinking. But then in a regression, I saw that in a past life, she had put me up for adoption, that she had been my mother. And so I realized immediately that I said, oh, I'm holding on to the grudge. The little boy didn't realize, you know, in the regression, I was able to experience her feelings, and she had to give up one of the children. There were too many. This was in Ireland. They couldn't feed all of them. And so the little boy couldn't understand that. But I was watching it from both my Peter consciousness and a larger consciousness. I was able to, you know, I forgave her. Like, I came out of the regression, and I had realized that I'd been holding this grudge that I wasn't even aware of against her. And so in that case, like forgiveness was strange because I didn't really have to make a lot of effort. It was just it was a misunderstanding of things. And I guess sometimes we do hold grudges against people and we don't fully understand things. And so sometimes a regression helps you get to those places where you can start seeing that things were different than you might have felt from the individualized self. Like I say, oftentimes our injuries happen from our separate consciousness, but our healing happens when we go into the oneness and we start being able to feel compassion and feel the feelings of other people. Like I was realized that my sister mother, it wasn't an easy choice for her. She was very, very suffering about having to give up one of her children. And they decided to do so because they thought that I was one of the ones that would be most likely to survive. But that's probably a good point to turn it over and have a conversation or take any questions. However you want to proceed.
Okay, that sounds terrific. So we're going to change the screen so that you can see us having this conversation.
Okay, shall I shut off my share?
Yeah, so if you could
Okay.
end your screen share, Peter.
There you go.
There we are. Okay. There was so much good information in what you were sharing. I want to go to the story about the gentleman with the man in the spear, and you were saying that the Akashic records even are not fixed. So when he went back to relive that experience of being killed, but with forgiveness and understanding, does that mean that his record changed? Because we tend to think of the Akashic records in the past. Well, that's the way it is, one
Yeah.
and done.
Well, Cayce had a dream of the future. It happened in the future. And then when he was asked about it, he said, all time is one. There's no such thing in spiritual level, past, present, and future. So there's an interactive element between the future, what we think of as now, and what we think of as the past. So in a way, I went back to my own Akashic record with my sister, and I re-experienced, I tinkered with it. The little boy didn't change his feelings, but something changed in me through an experience with the Akashic records. So his was maybe similar, that he was able to experience that. Like my guides didn't tell me, now go and be the little boy and forgive your mother. Maybe that would have been, but I think I did it anyway. I think I didn't have to. So I think that it's very fluid. How we move back. It's almost like sometimes I get strange. Like right now, this moment, is this real? Is this Akashic record? Is this a loop? Is there a you or a me in the future that's watching this or interacting with this and altering it? I don't know. At this, all I think is, to make it practical, all that we are aware of right this moment is that we feel present. Like you feel that this is your life, I feel this is my life, and I feel that that's the field that we ought to focus on and work through. And whether there's so much now in the field that they talk about parallel lives, that
Yes,
your
yes.
soul may have another person that's on the planet at the same time. That's all possible. The soul is so vast. I mean, in some of these experiences with people, you see that how much they're doing in this life when they're sleeping. A lot of us have night jobs. We're doing a lot of work. Maybe it's why we wake up tired. We're so busy. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Like,
those are some of the thoughts and experiences I've had. But I do feel that, Cayce said sometimes don't get too far out there in your thinking. It's just keep things practical. And
mhm.
so as much as some of this stuff is kind of mind altering in a way, to me, it's like eventually come back, there's something that you're here to learn, as Joy, there's something for me to learn and develop as Peter. And I try to keep focused on that, to forgive, to be more kind, keep the fruits of the Spirit in mind. And then whether that influences my past or my future, it's possible. I don't know. That
Mhm.
part's a puzzle.
Mhm.
Maybe
Mhm.
that'll be my next endeavor. But I'm sure some of these, you think you're going to make them simple, and then they're just more complicated. I mean, it's just like it's almost very hard to make it simple.
Mhm. Yeah, I just think that's so powerful, particularly for those who, and we all do, we all have regrets. Gosh, I wish I'd done that differently.
Hmm.
And to be able to go through the process and maybe do it differently,
Hmm.
to have that's healing for us, of course, but maybe even somehow reaching back in the past, making it healing for the other people who are involved.
Well, what I've learned with regressions is that we're actually always having the chance that the past, it repeats itself if it's broken, if there's things that have to be fixed.
Mhm.
So you'll see that, like right now, there's something that is going on in your life and my life that's an old issue, and it's been around for like 12 lifetimes, and it might be similar people, but the pattern is the same. And it's like we have an opportunity in this life with all that we've learned and grown to do something different than what we've done in the past. So it's almost like the guy could accept the death in a different consciousness, but every moment that we're going through in our life, we can embrace it in a different, I mean, you know,
Yes.
I don't know what the past is, but we can embrace it with a spiritual consciousness. But
Hmm.
sometimes it's like it helps to know what the past is, and then sometimes it doesn't come through, meaning that, yeah, I look at a lot of scripture, and you know, when Jesus appears and he comes to Thomas, says, I won't believe him until I can put my fingers through the holes in his hands. And then Jesus says, go ahead. But then he says, blessed are those who believe without seeing. And so I
Hmm.
think that some of the work that we have to do in life is to forgive and work through stuff without seeing the test. You know, like with my sister, I saw quite easily what I needed to do to forgive her, but there's certainly other people in my life that I'm trying so hard to get a regressive memory so that I could do it easier. But it's almost like, no, 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 you've got to do this one the hard way.
We did have a question about a clarification
Yeah,
on what you had said about past lives versus astrology.
yeah,
Could you just kind of go over that again for us?
sure. So what Edgar Cayce said, if you in chapter 11 of the Book of Revelation, you know, the Book of Revelation is the revelation of John the Beloved, and so he's in Patmos and he's having this awakening, and he you know, Casey analyzes the book of Revelation and says it's basically John's awakening. You know, he's meditating a lot in Patmos. There's not much else to do. And so he's going through um, an enlightenment process, so to speak. And so it's all of these different stages along the way that John is going through, but they also point out for us what we can go through. And so at some point, but at the 11th chapter of John's awakening, he meets the twins, the two witnesses. And Casey says, well, the two witnesses are, he's ready now to start awakening to more of himself than just what he thinks he is. That he has, as he's going into meditation, he's going into soul realms. And the two most important influences before we come into this life are our past life influences and our astrology. Now,
Hmm.
what Casey adds to the in between life experience, and it's unique to Casey, is that he says we do interplanetary sojourning. So it's like we have a school, a university system, and right now we're in the school of Earth. But when we leave physically, this is the only material or physical dimension. When our body, our soul departs the body, we go into experiences in Venus and in Mars and in Jupiter, and those become our astrology that comes into the endocrine system, and it plays out during our lifetime. But what's interesting about the astrology is that not only good things are put there, our challenges are put there. And because I'm an Aquarian, and as I've studied a little bit of astrology, and especially Casey's astrology, it's ruled by Uranus. And if you have Aquarian influences, it has to do with extremes. You do things in extreme. You have a hard time with the moderation. And I'm thinking, how on earth? Why is that? You know, if you're going to school and take a course, and you can take a course in either driving really slow or driving really fast. You know, no, I was puzzled by what the benefit of having this extreme nature. You know, it's basically the 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 sign or the influence of the addict. The addict, you know,
Hmm.
why should I drink one beer? You know, I want to. If you one is good, 20 is better. So I've had to wrestle with that pattern in my life. But as I've learned from Cayce, it says because you've had past lives where you have been a person of extremes. So instead of avoiding that altogether, just like we'd find with relationships or with patterns, you also embed the astrological patterns. So I've had to learn how to use my will to become more moderate. But actually, what I've learned is it's like I have to be either extremely good or extremely bad, and I'd rather try to be more extremely good. So that's how I've tried to work with it. But then you also have other aspects that balance it. So your astrology puts the things that you have to do in your life, the challenges, but it gives you resources to overcome them. So
Mhm.
in my chart has a lot of both. But that was really enlightening for me to realize that your astrology isn't just your resources, it's also the challenges that you're putting into your nature, because
Mhm.
it's like you could think of your past lives are like you're the muscles, and there you can work with those, but in a lifetime you don't really change your astrology. I mean, it's in the skeleton, like Cayce said.
Mhm.
The uh, past lives are in the personality, which would be
Mhm.
the ego accessible, and he says astrology is in the individuality. So it's much deeper. So you can work with your astrological nature. You don't ever really quite change it. Whereas you can work much more readily. It's almost like the astrology is going to help you and bring challenges into your life, but your free will help you work with that. But then all of your emotions, like Cayce's past lives, are registered emotionally. And so that's how you probably notice that. I'm just going to plug in my computer. You probably notice that you, you feel different ways about people when you meet them. And you
Mhm.
feel certain ways about places because that's registered emotionally. So you have much more of a ready access. And then when people do past life regressions, they feel things. You lead with the feeling, so they'll
Mhm.
feel the elements of past lives, and usually that's where it's very rich
Mhm.
emotionally.
Mhm. That is fascinating. I remembered you had said that the astrology was more on the mental level, the past lives on the emotional level.
Hmm.
Um, when How does someone know that this is real? When there
That's
you
a great
are, and
question.
you think, well, am I hypnotized or not? Am I in the state? Am I in the zone? Is this just, am I making this up? Is it the TV show I saw yesterday? I mean, how do you
Yeah.
know that this is real?
Well, I mean, I've researched that in all kinds of different ways, and I'll say, well, how do we know this is real right now?
Hmm.
It's called Maya, the ancient Hindu, that says this is the world of illusion, and then Buddha awoke from the dream. So I say, like, or I think is like, reality is like a radio station. You dial in. Right now we're here, we think this is reality, but then at night we go to sleep and we have dreams, but are those not really real? They feel like reality when we're there. And then before you're born, on your soul levels, that's a level of reality. So I think reality is very fluid. So then the other question becomes like, is this stuff made up?
Yes.
and and what I think is that Edgar Cayce put a high premium on what he called the imaginative forces. So we tend to think of like there's either real or made up. And if it's made up, it's nonsense. But Cayce says the only way that you're going to reach, he says you use the imaginative forces even when you meditate or you pray. So you have to use, it's like the placebo effect. If you believe in something, it actually takes on a power that's more than what it has. So it's through the imagination. It's like the creative forces. So you have to, the only way you get into higher dimensions is that you use the imagination. So in a session, I tell people it's going to feel like you're making it up. You're going to wonder afterwards, did I make it up? But my focus has become, I don't really wrestle with reality because it's so, who knows what it is. I look for the helpful healing aspects of it. So was the
Mhm.
session helpful versus was it real? Because
Mhm.
you can look at a dream, analyze a dream, and it can be really helpful, but you might not think that it was actually real. So those are like Carl Jung used to do this work, and he knew nobody believed in reincarnation. So he just called it creative imagination. And so people would close their eyes and they'd remember things, imagine things, and then they would cry and they would laugh and they would feel some kind of relief. And so that's my sort of standard answer to see, I look for three elements in a session. First, is it have an emotional component? You know, is there emotional release there? And then is there a spiritual component, which means that, like with my sister, I wasn't just I saw the little boy. I wasn't just the little boy. I was able to move into her consciousness and experience her feelings. And I was able to experience that this was Ireland. It was happening to other people. So I had emotion. It had a spiritual quality. By spiritual, I mean oneness. I was able to move non-locally. I wasn't just solely identified with the little boy that seemed to be the person I was from the past. And then it was an experience, meaning I wasn't thinking about it. It was like I was I was watching like a movie, and these scenes were developing. Now it
You were
takes a little
present.
while.
You
Yeah,
were
it takes
present.
it
Yeah.
takes some practice to get the
Yeah.
hang of it, you know, because you're kind of moving into something. But I oftentimes say, like, if I told you to close your eyes and imagine a pineapple, and you saw a pineapple, well, that would be, you know, that would be because of me. But if I said, close your eyes and just notice what comes into your mind, and if you saw a pineapple, there's a reason that it came. Like there's some subconscious, you know, it's a dream symbol for, you know, whatever would come to you out of the infinite possibilities. That's it's significant. And so in a session, it's like I never tell somebody, you know, behind that door is a druid lifetime. You know, and so, you know, they'll just say something is there, and then they'll go and they'll experience these things. And a lot of times people experience things that they have no conscious knowledge of. You know, they later research certain things, and sometimes they're able to come up with names and dates. I don't pursue it that way, but it just seems that there's more. Like I look at it like flying a kite. At first, you're doing a lot of work, and eventually the kite catches the wind and it starts to soar. I think a regression is like that. At some point, you're because I'm making suggestions at the beginning, and then at some point they begin to lift it.
Wow. That's a
That's
beautiful
the answer.
analogy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We are coming to the end of our hour. This has been
Oh,
terrific.
it's flown by.
Yeah. So let's get up on the screen the information on how you can find out more.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. So there is Peter's website. If you are interested in getting in touch with him, getting possibly a regression or talking further. We also have our Southern California resources, study groups, Facebook meetup, website, etc. Peter, did you want to say anything about people contacting you?
Yeah, they can. And my website is my email, and they can contact me. You know, they can look around the website and see the services I offer and the prices. And I teach, and I teach a lot of online now, so people can, if they're interested, can even learn this technique. Yeah, but that's everything I do is on my website, and about half of it is really through Edgar Cayce,
Okay.
A.R.E.
Are you teaching a regression course in the very
Yeah.
near future? Yeah.
I'm
Okay.
doing one in person in May, and in June I'm doing an online one in June 17th to 20th.
Okay. Okay, great.
Yeah, it went really well. It went really well.
And then I just wanted to bring up our next presenter is going to be Kevin Tedeschi, who's wrote the book on dreams and is going to be talking to us about how we work with our dreams on June 27th, which is another Sunday, 5 p.m. Pacific. Peter, you've just given us so much to think about and talk about and reflect on.
Sure.
I want to thank you. And we did record this, so we'll be sharing the recording with those who have been attending and had signed up for today. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. And the other thing also is I have a YouTube channel, and
Oh,
so
okay.
if they want to see more of like this PowerPoint, the full thing, there's many lectures on similar themes that they can also listen to for no charge.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. Good to know. Thank you, and God bless. Good night, everyone. Thank you for being with us, and especially Peter. So appreciate it. Many hugs. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.